AP Psych, these are your Module 5 notes. Now we're moving more into the actual research methods. We'll start today by looking at the scientific method and then looking at a group type of research known as descriptive research, where we'll talk about case studies, naturalistic observations, and surveys. So our essential question for today is, how does the methodology of research affect the outcome of a study? Our learning targets are, I can differentiate between different types of research with regard to purpose, strengths, and weaknesses. 2, I can discuss the value of reliance on operational definitions and measurement in behavioral research. And finally, I can distinguish between random assignment of participants to conditions in experiments. This next part is the one we're actually focusing on today, and random selection of participants, primarily in correlational studies and surveys. So we're going to start today with the scientific method. This is probably something you might be rolling your eyes because you're somewhat familiar. We're just going to apply it to psychology research and how does it differ, but you'll see many of the same elements as to what you've been exposed to in the past. So we're going to start off with the idea of a theory. But before I go into that, one thing I want you to notice, we're starting with theory, but with the scientific method, it's a very circular process. So even though I'm starting with theory, I could just as easily come up with this next part, which is going to be a hypothesis, and go from there as well. Okay, so a theory is an explanation using an integrated set of principles that organizes observations that have been made and then predicts behaviors or events. So typically theories are developed when they're highly researched, meaning there's been multiple studies done to help come up with this idea. Generally, they are bringing in, again, multiple studies into this one kind of big picture. And the thing that we need to understand about theories is they lend themselves to clear hypotheses or predictions. Okay, so the example here, and we'll use this throughout, is the theory that sleep boosts memory. So before that theory was developed, there were multiple studies done that helped lead to confirm that idea. Okay, so theory usually isn't just out of thin air. There's research to support it. Where often it starts is a hypothesis. Okay? A hypothesis, in our case, is going to be a statement and is a testable prediction that's often implied by a theory. So think of theory as more broad. Hypothesis is going to be a little bit more specific. Okay? And often a hypothesis is created after researching other scientists' results and observations in the environment. So there might have been similar studies done. Maybe this is a little bit of an offshoot. So if we look at the theory was sleep boosts memory, our prediction here, that's what our hypothesis is, it's a testable prediction, says when sleep deprived, people remember less from the day before. So notice it's a little bit more specific derivative of that theory. And again, key thing is it's testable and it's a prediction. So once we've made that prediction, we need to figure out, is this actually true? So our next step is to actually conduct the research, okay? Do our observations. And this can be done through a variety of types of research. We'll be talking about all 3 of these as we move through this unit, starting today with descriptive. We'll also talk later about correlational, that's looking at relationships between variables. And then finally, experiments, where we have an independent variable, a dependent variable, and so forth. What's going to be described here is more in line with an experiment. Then we look at our results and what conclusions can I draw from those results. And one thing that you'll hopefully notice as we move through talking about descriptive versus correlational versus experiments is that what I can say from my results, the conclusions that I can draw, vary according to what type of research I did. So let me give you a little preview. Okay, if I want to claim a cause and effect relationship, the only type of research that allows me to make that sort of cause effect claim that this caused that is an experiment. And an experiment is where I'm actually manipulating variables, as we see in this example. With descriptive or correlational, I can describe relationships. I can say there appears to be, but I can't make that conclusive cause-effect statement. So the example here, again, this would be an experiment, says I would give study material to people before either A, an ample night's sleep, or B, a shortened night's sleep. Then I test their memory. Okay, so I actually do the research and see what happens. If that research confirms my theory, great, now I have even more evidence to show this theory is correct. If my observations do not confirm the theory, maybe I find that people with a shortened night's memory actually did better on the memory test. Then I either need to retest, revise my theory, test it in another way, and see what happens before I draw any more conclusions. So what I'd like you to do before I move on to one other key kind of general idea that will come up a lot throughout this unit, I'd like you to explain the 3 steps of the scientific method in your own words. Okay, so just a heads up, if you didn't get that, you may want to rewatch. If you look in your digital notebook, you will actually be asked to do that again on Tuesday or Wednesday when I see you in class as a part of your retrieval practice. But before we move forward with looking at the different types of research, we need to talk about something called an operational definition. So the thing that makes research unique in the psychological sciences or in the behavioral sciences is many of the ideas that we discuss and talk about in research are very abstract. For example, memory is kind of an abstract idea. If I wanted to study, say, attraction and love, those are kind of abstract ideas. So what researchers have had to do is come up with what's known as an operational definition. Okay. Our textbook is kind of a weird, broad definition for this. I'm going to give you a little bit more specific one here. It says it's a carefully worded statement of the exact procedures or operations used in a research study. The way I want you to think of an operational definition is explaining specifically how a variable is going to be measured or quantified. So if I say I'm going to study memory, well, how can I study memory? What is that exactly going to look like? What kind of test am I going to give them? Or for example, if I say I'm going to study love, how do I measure love? Okay, do I give them a scale? Do I say something like, love is when I'm willing to give my last fry to them? Okay, and rate yourself on a 1 to 5 scale of how willing you are to give the person your last fry. Okay, notice I'm using very specific measurable things. That's what an operational definition is. The reason why operational definitions are so important is 1, they keep bias in check. Okay. And 2, they allow for replication, meaning if someone wanted to repeat my study to see if they got the same results, and we were talking about love, okay, if they don't follow the same procedures that I did, measure it in the same way, then how can they compare their results with mine? If I'm measuring love of on a 1 to 5 scale rate, how likely you are to give your last French fry, and they're measuring it as measure your heart rate when you see the person walk into the room, how can I compare my results? Okay, so I have to be very specific of how I'm measuring my variables. So what happens, this allow for replication. Replication is where you repeat the essence of a research study, generally with different participants or in different situations, to see if the conclusions that were drawn in the original study still hold true or extend to different participants or circumstances. So I'm going to have you practice writing your own operational definition. So I took that same research study that we saw in our example of the scientific method. So give study material to people before A, an ample night's sleep, or B, a shortened night's sleep, then test memory. So what I'd like you to do is write your own operational definition for memory. And just for the future, memory is our dependent variable. It's what we're actually measuring. Okay. So as you write it, you have a little bit of leeway of what this can look like. But what I really want you to answer or make sure you respond to is how is the variable, in this case memory, going to be measured or quantified? And I want you to be specific. So go ahead and write. Okay, then I'd like you to compare. This is what I came up with. This does not mean it's the only right answer, but I'm going to point out a couple things. So this is my operational definition. So memory is defined as the result of a memory test where subjects were asked to recall a list of 10 random words they were given the night before. So notice I'm being very specific about how I'm measuring memory. And that's what a good operational definition does. It's specific. If someone were to try to repeat the study, they know the type of memory test that I gave. If I wanted to make this even better, I would say the 10 random words. Okay, but any other researcher looking at this would know what I meant. We're going to be doing an activity with this in class with our families when I see you in class on Tuesday or Wednesday. So we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about types of descriptive research and ideas related to descriptive research. So what is descriptive research? First, these types. We have case studies, naturalistic observation, and surveys. You don't necessarily need to write this down right now because I'm going to go through each of these individually. Actually, before I say that, after I moved on, I realized I should probably say, think about in terms of how they're categorized together. Descriptive research literally describes. It's describing things, phenomenon, behaviors that are already happening. So with descriptive research, I'm not doing anything to shift anything about anyone's life. I'm not trying to mess with them. I'm not putting them in weird situations. I'm literally just recording what has already been done, what is currently happening without getting involved, or I'm asking them their own opinion about something. Okay, now let's move forward. So first, a case study. So a case study, again, descriptive research, where I'm really looking at, and this is going to be key here, this one individual or group, small group. Okay, case studies are done on limited numbers of people, where this person or small group is studied in depth in the hope of revealing universal principles. So again, it's a very detailed study. Think of it almost like a story of what's going on with them, of a single individual, group, or event. In this case, the goal of a case study doesn't explain the why. Instead, it simply describes the situation or the thing that that person is experiencing. So let me give you an example. Okay, what you're going to watch is a clip of this program that talks about Jeannie. So Jeannie grew up in Southern California, so this was a fairly local case. And just a slight warning for you in case this could potentially be upsetting. Jeannie was subscribed to extreme form of child abuse. Okay. She grew up in a household just down the freeway in Arcadia, down the 210, where she was kept in a room virtually by herself from the time she was a baby until she was discovered when her mom went to take her to the doctor when she was about 13 years old. She spent the majority of her day chained up to a chair or in her bed. And by the time she was found, she had the cognitive ability of a 2 or 3-year-old. Very, very limited language. It was a lot of babble, what you would expect from a baby. She wasn't potty trained, just a really, really severe case of neglect. One of the worst cases of child abuse in California. The reason why we're looking at Jeannie as a case study, why I'm using her as an example, actually has to do with her language ability. If you remember back to our last unit, one of the things we talked about was a critical period. And that's that kind of window of time that we think people have to learn language. Otherwise, they have difficulty throughout their lives. Jeannie was really used as a case study and as a means to try to help her in language development. Because her language was so limited, when she was found, a whole team of psychologists, including people from UCLA, linguists were studying her to see if they could catch her up, if they could help her learn language. So I'm going to have you watch just a little bit of her story here. So here you go.
For 13 years, Jeannie had lived a life of complete isolation. Raised in a city bedroom, Jeannie was as much a feral child.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I will give you access to the rest as well, but hopefully you got enough of the idea that her case was extreme. She was studied so much, one for her own welfare, but two, to try to figure out, is the critical period a real thing or not? Okay, I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about Jeannie if you ask in class as well. So, what I'd like you to write after learning about Jeannie's story, about hearing that, what do you see as a benefit of a case study? So, again, this really in depth look at just one person or small group of people. And then, what might you see as the limitations of case studies? So, go ahead and write. Okay, so some of the things you may have included, and if not, I want you to kind of add this in your own mind or maybe jot this down on your notes as well. Some of the benefits of case studies is it allows you to get a really good in-depth look at usually events that are rare. If we're using a case study, it means that there's probably not a lot of people who have had that phenomenon or are exhibiting that behavior. So it allows us to look in depth to try to learn more. Another benefit is case studies tend to be really powerful illustrators of a particular behavior or phenomenon. In this case, learning a lot about language that we might not know otherwise. Limitations, they're limited by one, who's the researcher and their own biases. Often they're written as more narrative stories, and the person writing the story could shift the evidence based on even biases that they don't recognize that they have. Two, because they are focused on such a small group, we don't know, is that unique to just that individual, or can it be applied, what we'll use as the word later, as generalized to a larger population? The next type of research study we're going to talk about is naturalistic observation. So, naturalistic observation is exactly what it sounds like. It's observing and recording behavior in naturally occurring situations where the goal of the researcher is trying not to manipulate or control the situation. They try to be as unobtrusive as they can. And again, they're not trying to explain the why of the behavior, but simply describing. Okay. So with naturalistic observation, it's not like creeper status, like what we see here. You're not like hiding in the bushes looking in people's private spaces, but instead I might be out in the open at public areas, even in a classroom. And instead of telling people, okay, everyone, I'm going to be watching for this behavior. I want to know how often you pick up your phones when you're sitting at a restaurant with friends. We're not going to tell people. Okay. But instead I might just sit back and I just record. I use hash marks. How many times do the people pick up their phones as they're watching someone else? Why do you think it's important that people don't know they're being watched? Just think about that. Why would that be important? Hopefully you thought of, or you probably have experienced yourself. If you know you're being watched, you change your behavior, right? If you've ever been in a classroom where an administrator walks in, everybody changes the behavior. If Mr. Kirk came walking in, even probably in this Zoom, if he popped in, everyone's behavior changes, right? You sit up a little straighter, you automatically turn into this like model student, and it's because you know you're being watched. So in naturalistic observation, they try really hard to not tell people or let them know that they're being watched, knowing that that could shift how they behave. So some of the benefits, and feel free to shorten these, okay? Some of the benefits is, again, people can watch and record behavior in natural situations, so you're more likely to get that real behavior. It can help to expand our understanding of certain ideas, and it can help lead to hypotheses that can be further studied through other methods, perhaps an experiment or a correlational study. The disadvantages, one, again, it cannot explain the why, it can only describe. Two, you have zero control over any of the variables. And three, you might be subjected to something called the Hawthorne effect or the observer effect, meaning just what I talked about before, that just by knowing that a variable is being measured, it might alter how someone acts or change that. The last type of descriptive research that we're going to talk about, and then we'll expand this into some other ideas, is the survey. All of you have taken a survey before. I've given you a survey before that hopefully you've taken. If you haven't done the course survey yet and you're listening to this, please make sure you do that. It's still on your weekly agenda. Okay, so a survey is a technique for ascertaining the self-reported attitudes or behaviors of people, usually by questioning a representative random sample of them. And I'll explain what that means more in just a little bit. Essentially, it means a random group of people. I'm not going to go around and hand pick the people that I want to take my survey because that could bias my results. Okay. There are some other things that might affect my results as well that I need to be mindful of. One are the flaws of self-reported data. Two is the wording choice, meaning literally how I'm asking the question. And then three, sampling, meaning who do I ask? Who am I asking to take my survey? So to demonstrate these ideas, I'm going to show you a clip. I'm actually going to pull up my Netflix. And this is a clip from Parks and Rec. If you've never seen it, highly recommend it. This is season 1, episode 2. So we're going to see our main character here. Her character's name is Leslie Knope, and they're going to be walking a neighborhood, asking people to take a survey. So here you go. This one I have to turn my volume up so you can hear it. All right, here you go.
Okay. Look, I didn't want it to have to come to this, but Anne, please open the sealed envelope that's in your binder. This is a little something I learned from Karl Rove. If you want to guarantee the results of the survey, you design the question to give you the answer that you want.
Wouldn't you rather have a park than a storage facility for nuclear waste? That seems iffy.
Yeah, don't worry about it, I made it all up.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Wouldn't you agree, like most decent Americans, that it would be a good idea to turn the abandoned lot on Sullivan Street into a beautiful community park?
Oh, actually, no, I'm not really a fan of parks. Very noisy, barbecue smell all the time.
Would you change your mind if I told you that 9 out of 10 meth users said the same exact thing?
What? How would you even know that?
Survey. We surveyed crystal meth users.
We're actually having a little town meeting tomorrow night if you wanted to.
Look, I know it sounds weird, but I just don't like living near parks. So if you have a flyer or something, I'd be happy to take it. Thank you.
You don't care about your kids and you don't support this park.
Excuse me?
What I mean is kids love parks and you should too.
So if I don't support your little project, then I don't love my daughter?
I didn't.
What time is this thing anyway?
That's next month for you.
Oh, it's tomorrow night. I'll be there.
Great.
Come on.
We got one.
Okay, so hopefully you picked up on some of these things that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And that's the idea before I go through this example is wording choice. So the way the question is written can vastly change a person's response. So if you notice in the clip, the main character Leslie says about agreeing with like crystal meth users if you don't say yes to this. That's changing the wording and it might change how someone responds. Okay, so we have to be really mindful of that. This was a real study done of a survey of over 1,200 adults by New York's American Museum of Natural History. And here's what they found. Notice the slight alterations in wording and how it changed the results. So at first, people were asked if they were interested in plants and trees. And when we asked that, 77% of people said yes. But when they changed it to, are you interested in botany, which you may know is the study of plants and trees, only 39% of people said they were interested. Next, people were asked, are you interested in fossils? With that, 48% of people said yes. But when they changed the wording to, are you interested in paleontology, which is the study of fossils, only 39% of people said yes. And then finally, people were asked, are you interested in rocks and minerals? In that case, 42% of people said yes. But when they changed it to apparently the more exciting sounding, are you interested in geology? the number went up to 53%. So notice each of these questions, they were asking the same thing, but just by changing the wording gave them vastly different results. So it's something that we need to be really mindful of if you're designing a survey is how are you asking the question? Think of this as very similar to what we talked about with memory, that just by changing the wording can alter someone's memory. Kind of similar idea here with surveys. So what I'd like you to do is explain how wording choice may affect the results of a survey. So go ahead and write. Okay, so again, this idea that how I phrase the question may alter how someone responds. There we go. The other thing I need to take into account with surveys is sampling. And that means who is taking part in my research? Who am I giving the survey to? This is important because of something called sampling bias. If I were trying to get, let's give a real example. If I were trying to get a handle on who might win the presidential election, okay, and I asked people, who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for, I'll use the two major party candidates, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Okay, that's my question. Who do you plan to vote for in November? If I only called people who were registered Democrats, what are the odds, okay, that they're going to say I'm voting for Donald Trump? Or vice versa, if I only call registered Republicans, who are they most likely to say? And if I use that and try to release that data and say, well, I polled these people and they said they're voting for, if I called only Democrats, they're voting for Joe Biden, or if I called only Republicans, they're voting for Donald Trump, and I try to release that data, that's flawed data. I have sampling bias. I can't trust those results because I didn't get a sample that represented the population as a whole, all of the people living in the United States with various political affiliations and beliefs. So I have to be really mindful of who I'm asking. So sampling bias is a flawed process that produces an unrepresentative sample, meaning it does not represent the population, meaning the group of people I'm trying to figure out their ideas. And what that means is if I ask only Democrats or only Republicans, my results cannot be generalized. You may want to highlight or underline that. Generalized means applied to the population as a whole. If I ask only Democrats and Republicans and say, here's what Democrats believe or here's what Republicans believe, then maybe that's okay. But if I'm trying to generalize to all the people in the United States, that's sampling bias. Not too much more. Okay. Other things I need to keep in mind with sampling, again, is the population. Population is defined down of all the cases in a group being studied from which samples may be drawn. And the population is determined by what's your purpose of the study. If it's a national study on who someone is likely to vote for in a presidential election, then the population is all people who are eligible to vote in the United States. That's my population. If I wanted to study something with Los Osos high school students and how satisfied you are with school lunches, then the population would be Los Osos high school students. So hopefully you can see the population depends on who is the demographic I'm trying to gather information about. Okay. In order to be able to generalize my results, my goal is always to get a random sample by means of random selection. And what that means is that everyone in the population has an equal chance of being chosen or being included in that survey or that research. So again, if I'm surveying someone, the population is the United States and who they're likely to vote for, that means that every eligible voter has an equal chance of being selected. And the way that's generally done on wide scale like that is using computer programs that will randomly select phone numbers of people. Okay, it could be on a small scale, as simple as if I was doing a survey of the population of students who are in my class, I would put all of your names in a hat, and randomly draw out, say, 50 of them out of the 100 plus students I have. And by putting everyone's name in a hat, making sure they're all on similar size paper, everyone in that population, my class, my students, have an equal chance of being chosen. And generally what happens if a sample is random, it is usually representative, meaning it is similar in makeup of the population in which it was derived. So I probably, if I use my students as an example, we put all of your names in a hat. I randomly draw out, let's say, half of you. Odds are, if I look up the makeup, meaning by gender, by race, by socioeconomic status, whatever markers I want to use, they tend to be pretty even, where I can then say whatever conclusions I come to can be applied or generalized to everyone in that group. So this is our last question. I would like you to tell me, what is the purpose of random sampling? Why is that an important concept? Once you're done with that, that is the end of these notes. If you have questions, we'll be talking about a lot of these ideas in class just to make sure that they're clear. Before we move forward, I also have a couple example activities for you as well. I hope you all have a great weekend, a 3-day weekend, and are nice and refreshed when we return on Tuesday or Wednesday. Have a great day.